To sew a casing and sew elastic, this would be applicable to sewing a waistband, an elastic waistband. What I'm doing here is I'm just taking a piece of elastic and I'm overlapping it about 1/2 inch. So you want to make sure that you have an extra inch of your elastic, because 1/2 inch on each, actually no, just an extra 1/2 inch, because it's still accounting for that 1/2 inch in the measurement. So my elastic is smaller than the casing, so that way there's the casing will pucker and gather, and then the elastic will contract. So I'm just sewing a rectangle around here, so when I get to the edge, I put my needle into the elastic. I went too far. There we go. Turning around, sewing another line. And then to really make sure that it's extra secure, I like to sew it across or an X into it. So I'm sewing from the top right corner to the bottom left corner. And I'll back stitch to the center. And then from the center, I'm going to the bottom right corner. And then I'm just going to back stitch all the way to the top left and back down. So my thread's a little bit tangled right now. There we go. So there's an X there. It just makes it extra secure. I just need to trim the thread now. So this is the fabric that I'm going to sew the elastic into. I serged around the top of this fabric. I cut a really long rectangle, placed it right sides together, serged the edge, and then I just serged around the top, because when this gets folded in and I sew along to make that casing for the elastic to be in, I want to make sure this fabric here doesn't fray. So if you don't have a serger, you could zigzag it. The bottom of my fabric is unfinished because this is just a demo on how to make a casing and sew elastic into it. So what I need to do is I have my circle of elastic and I need to figure out how large I want to make my casing. So you can see here that this edge here is lining up right to that elastic, and I need it to come over 1/4 inch so that that serged edge is just on the other side of the elastic. And I could do this by measuring the elastic and adding 1/4 inch, but what I'm doing instead is just using this elastic as a guide. So I'm briefly just going to iron it, and then I take that elastic out. Now what I'll do is go ahead and get my ruler out and measure all the way around and press this casing down. So this is 1 inch and just over 1 5/8 inches. And then I'll make sure my elastic goes on top of that. So all the way around, I need to make sure that this is 1 5/8 inches. So once I get one line ironed down, I can just shift over. And I want to be really careful as I'm doing this, not to iron this edge so it's nice and tight, or there's a crease in the edge, because I want the fabric on the bottom to be able to flow more. So again, I'm measuring this so it's 1 5/8 inches. And then notice when I iron it, I don't actually crease that edge there. So because I have this side ironed, it's starting to show up a little bit and let me know if I am getting the right size of the casing. And I want to make sure when I'm ironing on top of the other layer of fabric that it's already been ironed down, so I don't accidentally make a crease that's the wrong size. And I'm just double checking as I iron because I'm using this fold as a guide. And so you can see this is the correct crease here. This is an old crease that I had ironed. But it looks like now, because I have the correct crease on both sides, this should be correct. But I still double check it. It needs to be a little bit larger. There we go. Oh, no, it was correct. There we go. Okay, so I have my casing ironed on, and now I'll put this fabric in, or the elastic in, and I'm going to start sewing right along that 1/4 inch there. I want to be really careful that I'm sewing the fabric to the fabric and not the elastic. Now if this was an actual skirt that I was sewing or a pair of pants, I would make sure that my thread matches the fabric, the color. So I'm just going to sew right along the top of that 1/4 inch where the top of the serge is. And I make sure that this other part of the fabric is out of the way. So I'm only sewing on one layer of the fabric. And then this elastic gets placed flat down inside of that casing. And then I can pull this elastic away so it doesn't get in the way of the shaft of the sewing machine. So my sewing machine was having a little bit hard time making it go because the elastic is thicker than the fabric, and so it was catching the foot a little bit. So I just guided it with my hands from the back and the front. There we go, now it's moving more. So as I'm sewing, you can see that the fabric is almost sewn into a circle. So I need to make sure to push that fabric back so I can get it all sewn. And this casing is fairly tight, so it's a little bit hard to push it back. But that gives you a much cleaner look for an elastic waist, to have the casing fairly tight. And I like sewing the elastic into the casing where the elastic's already sewn into a circle, as opposed to waiting until I sew a casing, pull the elastic through. There are a lot of extra steps if you go that way, so this is much faster in the long run. I just want to make sure each time I start sewing that I straighten things out and really flatten this as much as possible to sew. And then once this is all sewn, I can just stretch it out and it will really start evening out the puckering of the elastic. And every time I lift up my presser foot or the fabric to move it around when I'm not sewing, I make sure to put the needle inside down into the fabric so that my stitch can continue without being disrupted. Right now, I forgot to put the needle in before I really pull on that fabric. I want to make sure the needle's in. Okay, so I'm at the final stretch of sewing. At this point here, I'm just stretching this out and letting the feed dogs pull it through as I get to the very final edge. There we go. Now it's sewn all the way around. Okay, so now I can start stretching the elastic, and you can see how that's even around for the waistband. And once I really get it to where I want it to be, it's a good idea to just sew a straight line down into the elastic and the fabric. And I like to do it along the seam. If you have two seams, if this is a skirt, on both sides, that really helps the fabric stay where it's supposed to stay more in terms of how much it puckers. So there's just a seam there, and then if I had another seam, I would do it on that side. It also helps prevent the elastic from twisting inside of the casing. That can be a problem if your casing's too big and the elastic has a lot of room to float and twist. But there is a casing, just using a single piece of fabric to sew a casing.